Good morning. I'm Berks County Commissioner Christian Leinbach, and I want to welcome you to the Commissioners Board meeting for November 21st. We are broadcasting live via Microsoft Teams live event. We're also in person and then broadcasting via BCTV, as well as our Facebook and YouTube live pages. We'll call the meeting to order with a moment of silence followed by a pledge to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. While it's on my mind, can we have somebody straighten the American flag? I think of it every time I pledge to it, it's leaning over. So just make a note, we'll get that. Nobody's fault. I just keep forgetting to say something. At this time, I'll recognize Lynn Burns, Executive Assistant to Commissioner Santoni, to read the public comment policy.
Public comment will be accepted in person and through the Q&A function. Please include your first name, last name, and municipality for all comments. Any comment without name and municipality will not be considered. Each citizen can submit one comment. Comment length is dictated by limitations of the platform being used. Teams, Q&A, Facebook, YouTube. In-person comments will be accepted first, followed by comments submitted virtually. The meeting comment period is limited to a total of 30 minutes, including both in-person and virtual comments. This time period may be extended at the discretion of the board. Please be concise. Comments that are germane to county business will be read during the meeting and should not be considered to be interactive dialogue with the commissioners. The county solicitor shall be the final arbiter of whether a comment is germane and should be read. Any commissioner response to public comment will be done at the discretion of the commissioners.
Thank you very much, Lynn. The first item on our agenda is Scott Waller. He'll be presenting virtually, and this is a request to approve the issue of bonds to refinance a project for the benefit of Lutheran Senior Services, formerly Diakon Lutheran Social Ministries. And at this time, I will recognize Scott Waller to present. Scott.
Hey, good morning, and thank you, commissioners. Thank you to the county's team for allowing us to be in front of you today. So I'm also joined by my colleague, Catherine Wilson. We serve as bond counsel to Lutheran Senior Services and Lutheran Senior Services East, formerly Diakon Lutheran Social Ministries, as mentioned, which owns and operates several senior living communities across the country, primarily Missouri, Illinois, and Pennsylvania, including the Lutheran home at Topton in Berks County. Lutheran Senior Services requested that the Health and Educational Facilities Authority of the state of Missouri, which is a conduit governmental tax-exempt bond issuer, issue bonds for multiple purposes, including new money projects in Missouri, as well as refunding Series 2015 bonds that included various projects, including a project for Lutheran home at Topton. So we are here for what is called TEFRA proceedings. So federal tax law requires that if you issue tax-exempt bonds, i.e. bonds the interest on which is excludable from gross income for federal income tax purposes, that not only does the issuer and its governmental jurisdiction need to have a hearing, but also each jurisdiction in which the property to be financed is located, which is why we're before you with this request. So as part of TEFRA proceedings, there are three requirements. One is publication of notice, either in a newspaper or posting online on the county's website. Two is holding a public hearing that is open to the public, and which is what we're doing right now. And three is approval of the applicable governmental unit here, the county commissioners, for which we have a resolution to be considered right after these comments and the opening of comments to the public. I think the biggest takeaway for this is it is just a federal tax law requirement. Not to disparage that, obviously, but it is not a request otherwise of the county to participate in the issuance of the bonds. the county has no liability, financial or otherwise, for the issuance of the bonds. And the last time the county did this for Diakon Lutheran Social Ministries for a Lutheran Home at Topton project was 2019. So been through this process before, but that is the request. And with that, I think because this is meant to be kind of a hearing component, commissioners, if members of the public had submitted comments in advance or members of the public using your public comment procedures have submitted, then I think those are welcome to be entertained now. And then commissioners, if you have any questions or comments, either now or when you consider the resolution later on the agenda. But from our perspective at Gilmore and Bell and on behalf of Lutheran Senior Services and the communities it serves, thank you very much for considering this request.
Thank you very much, Scott. We have no one signed up to make any comment on this specific agenda item. Since this is unique, is there anyone present or online that has a comment on this specific agenda item? Hearing none and seeing none, we will go ahead and entertain the will of the board. I should reiterate, again, the reason this is done is determine the local body, in this case, the county commissioners, determine is this a value to our community. As noted by Scott, there's no liability, financial or otherwise, but I believe that is the reason that the federal government requests the agreement of the local body, in this case, the county of Berks, in case it would be for something that we would not necessarily want to see in the community or expanded in the community. I know both of us have been there at least a couple of times in the last few years. You're very aware of it, Dante. What is the will of the board on item 371.2024A?
I will make a motion to approve the issuance of bonds to refinance their projects.
I'll second the motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you very much, Scott, and I believe was it Catherine? Thank you for being here virtually, and you have your approval.
Thank you to you and your team. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will close that portion of the meeting, and we will go to a second presentation. This is the annual presentation of the draft budget for 2025. And at this time, I'll recognize our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Bob Patrizio.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just bear with me a second.
Sure.
While did I click over?
Hey there.
There. Where's the, I'm here. Is it ready to go? Okay. We're on. Okay. All right. Thank you. Commissioners, thank you. I really appreciate having the honor and privilege to present to the three of you and the citizens of Berks County our proposed 2025 budget. As you know, and as we indicated in our August 13th budget operations meeting, we knew 2025 was going to be a very challenging budget cycle, particularly in terms of being able to achieve all our budget goals that were set out for this budget cycle, which are as follows.
Try on the mouse.
Oh, okay. Excuse me, a little technical difficulty with the keyboard. So those goals were balance the operating budget without the use of reserves, minimize size of tax increase to balance the budget, limit wage growth to projected inflation and limit headcount growth, fund new facility infrastructure needs with new debt and reserves, no new unfunded programs, maintain commitment to farmland preservation, education, i.e. RAC.
Minimize it.
Economic development, library, and park systems. Maintain long-term financial stability, prioritize capital improvements to parks, bridges, and infrastructure projects, technology and software. And I would also add public safety, emergency 911. With that in mind, this is a summary of what we were able to accomplish for this budget cycle as of today. You can see we're starting with a county budget deficit of all funds, 37.3 million without a tax increase. With a tax increase, 24.5. But more importantly, as you progress down through this list, you get to the bottom line, and we ended up with an operating budget deficit, general governmental funds deficit of 12.8 million, in spite of our best efforts. And as a result, we're recommending an 8% tax increase. That would be a new tax rate of 9.013 mils. And the impact on $100,000 of taxable assessed value would be $66.80 more per year. And just for the listening audience, the progression between all funds deficit and operating budget tax impact deficit, those items in between there that are for like Berks and liquid fuels, these are special special funds that have dedicated resources and dedicated net assets and fund balance for which we would never need to ask the taxpayers for tax money. So we back those out. We also isolate one-time use of reserves for like capital, because we're saying we have reserves, we're going to use reserves. We don't need to raise taxes on the tax base to pay for that one-time use of reserves, which is totally in compliance with our fiscal policy. But also one of the goals this year was to use a combination of new debt and reserves. And you can see on here, if you progress down about halfway through the list, you have bond proceeds of 35 million. We're recommending a bond issue up to a maximum of 35 million to fund our capital plan over the next 3 years. You also see where
let's hold on that. And your reason, I want to make sure the public understand, because it just sounds like, I think most people heard new debt.
Yes.
The reason you're doing new debt in spite of having significant reserves is because if you take too much out of the reserves, even for capital, it will impact our bond rating and dramatically increase the cost of money for the county, thereby having a negative impact on our taxpayers.
That is correct. And we do forecasting, right? And we knew that if we just couldn't continue down that path. And I was going to touch on it further. Consider this like an executive summary, because we came right out of the box with, we're recommending an 8% tax increase. But the answer to that question is yes, we have a minimum requirement of unassigned fund balance reserves to our governmental budget operating cost. And that is 605 million for our governmental funds. That's excluding Berks and it's excluding bond funded expenditures, because you borrow money, dedicated source of money for that. You can only use it for capital. But we were projecting we were going to go under the minimum 60-day requirement of being able to carry our total governmental operating expenditure budget in the absence of any other revenue. And that is a level that's set to maintain our financial integrity and our fiscal strength. And the fact that we're able to do that, and the board has the political will to also satisfy another requirement, which is in our policy, is that we will not use reserves to balance structural operating, governmental operating deficits. We get a lot of credit on the rating call because of our fiscal management, the will of the board to adhere to those policies. But again, Christian, Commissioner, you were right. That's why we decided we needed to go with additional bond proceeds. I was going to talk about this later, but let's just cover it right now.
We haven't done it in years.
The last time we did a new money issue was in 2015.
Okay.
And we have paid down debt significantly with excess reserves since then. We have a very low debt profile. I don't expect it's going to change our bond rating at all. The more important thing that would have done that is if we just absorbed 12.8 million operating deficit, said we're not raising taxes. That would cause a major problem with the rating agency for sure. And considering we're going to go to the market next year, and borrow new money, to your point, we want that AAA bond rating, right? On a 35 million issue, I would estimate that's at least about $5 million in lower interest over a 20-year period. That's
significant.
serious money.
And so the other thing to point out when you talk about structural versus operation, I think when you see this top line, it's helpful to get into the core. An operational or structural deficit doesn't have anything to do with capital. Capital is a one-time expenditure. It has to do with reoccurring costs.
Yes.
And the largest area of reoccurring costs are wages, salaries, and benefits. Nothing else comes close. There's other things like insurance and
utilities,
right,
some contracted
those types
supplies.
of costs,
Yeah.
where those supplies and so forth. Where did we end up on the prior slide? Goal was on head count. Do you know where we started the year and where we ended up in head count?
Well, we ended up 19 positions lower.
So that's important for people to understand that this is not something that we all of a sudden started looking at in the last month. This is something that the budget department, the COO team, and the commissioners have been focused on since the beginning of the year because of the information you provided us. Coming into this year, we knew this was going to be a tough year. And because of it, we have done everything I think that we reasonably could do to control costs. And even being down 19, the biggest part of that structural deficit is tied to salary, wages, and benefits.
And we were going to get to that very shortly, but let me finish on this at a high level. So at a very high level, what are the reasons why we have this deficit and why we need the tax increase? It's an increase in personnel costs. We're talking about general governmental operations. About 60% of that is the general fund, which is general government operations. We also have, and that's about 7 million. We have increase in special revenue fund support. We call it match, but it's contribution to maximize federal state funding. And that's 3.6 billion. That includes some of the personnel for those funds. It's an increase in capital at 911, also includes personnel there. It includes a new shelter program. So one of the goals was no new programming, but we didn't completely satisfy that goal because it was determined from a public safety point of view and a need in the community that we needed to open up a youth shelter program in county. That added additional cost to CYS and JPO's budget on a combined basis that the general taxpayer dollars had to pay about $580,000. New debt service, you don't see it here, but you'll see it on an upcoming slide. On that 35 million is 2.5 million a year over 20 years. And we also, you'll see it on the next slide, but we missed the taxable assessed value, took a nosedive in 24. Mm-hmm. And the build of that in 24 sets the billing rate and revenue number for March 1 of 25.
That's what tax revenue, property tax revenue for the county.
Yes, and on taxable assessed value. And I'm just going to give you a high level, and we'll get into it a little more as we go. But that growth rate, and Commissioner Leinbach, you'll remember this, and so will former Commissioner Barnhart, it's less than 0.1%. That's what's been added for the whole year. Yes, like 0.07%. The last time it was this low was in 2010.
Yep.
And just to put this in context, right? So as a result of that, that growth in that taxable assessed value generated about $450,000 of new tax revenue.
And is that due to, because there were massive number of appeals, big appeals?
Yeah, so it's three things, but primarily it's the appeals. And that's a function that happened because good news, if you own a house, market values have just been screaming higher since COVID. Mm. But the bad news side of that equation is the last time we did a countywide reassessment ended 94. Mm-hmm. That they measure that as a percentage of the market value. So as the market value goes up, that percentage goes down. That's called a common level ratio. And it gives you an estimate of what taxable values probably should be, normalizing to 94. We were decimated with appeals, not only a year ago, very late in the budget cycle too. We found this out like at the very end of October last year. $69 million reduction in taxable assessed value awarded by the Tax Assessment Board. This year, we were hoping maybe that was a one-time thing because there was a lot of big corporate appeals in there. We just got on October 30th, the appeals this year. It's another $64 million reduction. That's $133 million loss in tax base since the end of 2023. That equates to $1.2 million of tax revenue. So you look at the organic growth, 400, 500, 450,000, and you look at what was in the forecast for next year, I mean, for this budget coming up, we missed by 1.5 million. They're the reasons. These are the reasons why we ended up with a deficit, why we need an 8% tax increase. Now, let me put that in context. When we came in August, we did a presentation. We knew, we communicated, we knew we were looking at a really difficult budget cycle. And we even indicated that we thought the minimum was going to be 9%. And then we talked about additional requests to the county. We talked about youth center, and we talked about the youth detention center, the youth shelter care services. We talked about potentially needing debt, and we were telegraphing that 9 was the minimum. We could very well be anywhere between 10 and 12%. So here's the other side of the coin. What happened that we ended up at 8? And here's what happened. We ended up where we had no tax increase needed for the youth detention center. As long as we do a 1/3, 3-county partnership. Laura Jones, my deputy director, is sitting to my left. She's been integrally involved in children and youth services, as you know, and got under the hood and really took a deep dive along with Dawn, who's sitting right here. And we determined that what we were spending on contracted placements was equal to what we expect the one-third cost to be, even with inflation. That was a great story because that alone was going to add almost 0.7% tax increase. We also increased our interest income. We were able to increase it by 1%. And I'll talk about the reasons when we go a little further in. But to make it short story, because of these adjustments you see here on this, the use of the COVID community relief money, and imagine Berks expenditures, including infrastructure bank, we thought we were going to spend it 24. We didn't. So we have more reserves beginning 25. So we're able to have a higher amount of dollars to invest. And we think that even though the Fed is cutting rates, we think that the bond market's screaming that there's going to be inflation, the Treasury bond market next year. So we're hopeful we can get through the year at a reasonably decent investment return on our money. The other thing would be that by bond financing some of this capital, it gives us more reserves that we can invest and earn money on. We increased fee-for-service revenues. We had departments like the Recorder of Deeds recommended an increase in the UPI fee, which I believe was on last week's commissioner agenda. That was very helpful. We had other row officers kick in with reducing headcount. Those kind of things helped lower that as well. We also, for the first time in this budget, we're doing a transfer from Berksheim, and we're going to let the taxpayers participate in a significant investment that we make in the Berksheim and the returns that we have to help offset some of the tax burden on the taxpayers. And I'll talk about that a little further in the presentation, why I'm confident in doing that now where I wasn't over the last 2 years. And of course, shelter care. We thought we were going to have an increase there of close to 0.75%. And, when this was presented, Commissioner Rivera will remember this, we were told our commitment was 10 beds. We put 10 out-of-county beds in there. They said they were there. Build it, they'll come. The contracts are being done right now. I've talked with George. We confirmed the rates. They should be done like relatively soon. And we need to go out and really manage that. If we do that, we don't need a tax increase as much tax increase on the shelter as just that little bit of match that ended up dropping down. So it lowered that. So having said that, Commissioner Leinbach, this will speak to the point that you were making. The issue is we have a structural imbalance. So what this chart's designed to show you is the green line is the growth in our tax base. And if you look at 2019 forward, we're just keeping the same date range and added 25 as we had a year ago. And just a reminder, the reason we started with 19 last year is because the last tax increase prior to 19 was January 1 of 18.
Right.
And then you're looking at the personnel line, And we were doing really well for 20, 21, 22. A lot of that reason was we had significant vacancies, the labor market constricted. We couldn't hire people for Berks time. And what was happening is it suppressed not only our total wage budget, but it also suppressed our total healthcare actual claim budget. And then all of a sudden you see a crossover happen about halfway, starts beginning in 22 and starts streaking up. And what that slope is telling you is we needed to compete. We realized we weren't able to pay we had to compete against a lot of.
So this is cost and not head count.
This is cost.
Yeah, so it's because people may
Yeah, the
have
head
heard
count was
19 fewer.
No, it was less. It actually
Yeah,
fewer.
but it's cost.
Yeah, you would ask what the head count is. It's down to 2,150 full-time equivalents from 2,169, like in this budget.
Yep.
And so this slope was primarily, and we talked about this last year too, we had to be competitive. We found we couldn't retain highly skilled and talented employees, and we couldn't attract them. And it was in multiple departments. And so the good news is that we're still lower than the rate of inflation by about 6%, even after with this increase here, okay? And I think that's a real testament to our fiscal discipline, our fiscal management, our willingness as a board, as a COO team, and just all the departments in the county, not the least of which would be human resources, because personnel is the key. Control personnel. It's not just wages, it's benefits, it's pension. You control the acceleration of this slope, right? So that's a testament to why we've been able to rein this in. And also goes to why we were able to lower this lower than 9%, which is what we thought in September. And there's additional reasons for the deficit, and some of these I did not talk about yet. It's inflationary increases on contracted services. We're still experiencing inflation. I'll make this point here. The CPI for all U.S. cities in September was 2.4%, and it went up to 2.6%. When you look at the Mid-Atlantic area where we're operating, it was 3.4 in September and went up to 3.6 in October. I mean, I just got this like a couple days ago. That's our reality. And I think that'll make sense when we get a little more into what is actually the breakdown of personnel costs. But it also affects contracted service because most of our contracted service providers are human service providers, and they have to pay employees to come out and do the services for us. And so, we have to deal with that. One of the things we did as a team, you remember in the kickoff budget, we said we had to start curbing the rate of inflation, what we're giving now, not just employee wages, but also contracted wages. I mean, some things like construction costs, we're at the mercy of the bid, right? And we said, we worked closely with Kelly and George in the procurement department, and we said, no more than 3%. If somebody asks for more than 3%, you gotta let me know, and I'm gonna go work with COO Barnhart and Deputy COO Medaglia. This is so entrenched in my head for 20 years. I don't think I'll ever get it right. I finally got Dark Horse right.
Mitch Dark Horse.
Yeah, I always want to call him Daycourt. It doesn't. But I got it down.
Prescott.
I got it, man. So we put a cap on it, and Commissioner or COO Barnhart, we came a couple times, and the only time we went higher was emergencies. And one of the reasons we're doing youth detention center, I'll let you guys talk about it, is because the reliability of beds, the quality of those services. But we had to pay more, and like one of our providers in the southern part of county just jacked the prices up significantly during 2024. And we talked about it. We really didn't have a choice.
And dramatically fewer beds and pathetic controls over the process.
Higher contribution to human services, I already talked about in the executive overview on the third slide. Increase in debt, we already talked about that. Slower growth in tax base, it's higher appeals, not only just tax assessment board, but it's also higher appeals in court cases that have gone through. I'll give you an example. Normally in January, they have a tax interim for just what hits the books in January. We've had Januaries, if you look back historically, adding 27 million, 16 million, 32 million. We get the one for January of 24. Now remember, this is building the 25 taxable base. It was negative $23 million. I knew right then and there, oh, something's not good in Dodge City, right? Like, we need to get to the bottom of this. Court cases got decided. So we got off on the wrong foot right from the very beginning. The subsequent interims for by month, which were lower than they have been, if you just look at the last 3 years average. And they were lower because the cost of commercial financing for businesses was still extremely high. Fed didn't start cutting rates till September. Mortgage rates were still high. And what I concluded was that it slowed the development projects that were going on, because one thing that happens in an uncertain economy for corporations in the worldwide, and certainly in this area, is they pull back on capital expenditure right away. They go into the bunker mode and they go, we got to preserve cash. And I believe we suffered from that. That's the bad news. I already talked about the appeals that happened in October. The good news, little silver lining, it's too early to determine it's a trend, is the October interim that we got November 15th was added $52 million. I mean, that almost equaled everything added for the whole year and plus some. If I go back and showed you what that was October last year, it was a negative 51 million. That is a 109 million swing. But here's the deal, all right? That's in our number, and we still only have about 450 organic growth. But if that trend is an indicator of what's to come, if the Fed if they continue to lower rates, at least for commercial financing, that could be a harbinger of good things to come next year. I mean, there's still some challenges with things like warehouses where we were counting on it, didn't happen. But other than that, I think that I'm hopeful that when we're sitting here for the 26 budget, that we're able to come in with a stronger growth rate than 0.07%. Growth in support of strategic partners. This is more inflationary increases for PSU Ag Extension. SCTA BARDA is legal. It's a contribution plus 5% for them to get 100% of the state money. Schuylkill River and Passenger Rail, this includes the final contribution of our original commitment. Connection Works has a small inflation factor on the R3 program, but this is another one besides shelter care where we actually didn't satisfy no net new unfunded programming. Included in this budget is $290,000 for a program that has a significant amount of value called Reentry Works. But I have to give the Board of Commissioners credit. You knew the situation we were in. They asked for significantly more money than the $290,000 they got. And I mean, significantly more, like, well, if you looked at just what this played out to over a couple of years, well in excess of $1 million.
And to their credit, they came to our budget meeting, I think in August, and they came back to us and said, okay, we understand where things are. We don't want to lose the opportunity with this program. And they actually came back with several options.
They did. 2 rounds.
That's unusual.
Yes.
Normally, in my 17 years, you get an ask, and the ask is the ask, and they're not going to move from it, and you're left with yes or no. And in this case, Peggy and Nikki, I think, did a very good job. And I think you would agree, they made a case for what they're doing, and the jail is on board with this effort as well. And it has to do fundamentally with doing a better job when people are leaving our jail system to make sure they have access to the information and programs that they need that mean they are far less likely to come back into our jail. Because when somebody's in the county jail system, they become a ward of the county taxpayer. 99% of the cost associated with an inmate is borne by the county, and that includes their health care. This idea that people think Medicare or Medicaid or veterans benefits or private insurance, that's all out the window. They walk through that door, whether they're convicted or not. They lose all of that. I don't necessarily agree with that at all, but that's the reality. And so this program is not just about more money for connections work. It's about more well-founded, well-thought-out money for a program that makes a whole lot of sense. And this came out of a program you attended. All three commissioners have attended, and it was a re-entry simulation that took place over at West Lawn United Methodist Church, and then more recently, Pro Burco did one. I think all three of us spoke there at that event. And it really demonstrates the challenges people are facing. So I normally wouldn't spend that kind of time, but in my time, I've never have seen an entity say, look, we get it. Let's rework it. And they reworked it several times to get it down where they are able to do their program and we are able to support it.
I appreciate the comments. And just to accentuate very quickly what you mentioned, our budget for inmate healthcare at the jail this year, 25, is $7.4 million. And it's about 450,000 higher than it was a year ago.
And that's based on the reality of what we have paid in the past. And again, most folks don't even think about that when somebody's in jail, that healthcare is a direct cost, and the taxpayers of Berks County are paying that $7 million plus in healthcare.
Yes. Growth in utility cost as well. We got high, and it's not only rates, but it's also utilization of our facilities. We're having greater utilization, not only at the North Campus, but South Campus. And we have continued rate of inflations. On that point, I'm hopeful with the new federal administration, we get a slightly different energy policy, and we can start to see all the raw material input costs that you need energy to produce go down. And I think that will affect our budget in a very positive way, and we're counting on that. So the bottom line is, it's no secret we did a tax increase last year. This is the blue line, and 8.99, and we're requesting another 8 this year. That'll take us up to 16.99%. But the bottom line here is, commissioners, we are still 9.11% lower than the rate of inflation. Again, a real testament to all the team effort at department level, the leadership level, to help rein in the cost and not just throw our hands up and go, well, inflation's X, so that's what we need to increase our cost by. So that brings us to where we are today. We're recommending a general fund expenditure budget of $310.8 million. We're recommending an expenditure budget of all funds of $686.7 million. That will leave us a net surplus deficit of $24.5 million. There's a couple different ways you can look at that. But I would say if you want to just identify one of the reasons we have that deficit, it's the carryover of those COVID community support payments that just weren't spent in 24. They're going to be spent in 25. We always intended to use reserves because the way we applied our ARPA money created reserves to be able to fund this, so it never hurt the taxpayers at all. And we're required by code to stipulate a general fund expenditure budget. We're also required by code to stipulate the tax rate. And again, 9.013 mils. This is just some anecdotal data about the actual tax billing. Just from the billing that would be March 1st, you see the increase, 13.2 million. Here's where you can see the growth in tax base, 400,000, and then the tax rate impact. You can see the low assessed value. I already talked about the reasons, and I'm showing you what it was a year ago. And then total tax revenue, just to point out, if somebody's looking, it is higher than 174.1, and that's because we have the interim taxes to get billed, and we have a tax claim department that collects delinquent taxes. Budget highlights. I already talked about the interest. You can see I'm planning on averaging 4.25%. Our treasurer, Mitch Darkhort, is here. Mitch, I'm assuming we'll get to the end of the year. We'll be probably down around 4.75% if the feds do another cut, and we'll end next year at 3.75. I don't think there'll be as many cuts next year if the treasury bond market is correct, that the federal government's still going to spend money. We're still going to have inflationary pressure. We'll see, but that definitely helped the tax rate increase. There's the 19 reduction in headcount. It's primarily the Heim. We finally aligned their staff with a resident census that we're comfortable with, we can obtain based on the new staffing ratios. And youth shelter offset that decrease by adding 38 new funded positions. Wage increase, 7.2 million, 5.37%. If it wasn't for the youth shelter program, that would have been 3.58%. I think that's important to understand. And that's broken down 3.41% average rate increase. Already mentioned that the Mid-Atlantic CPI for October is 3.4%, and the employer cost index annualized for Q3 9/30/24 is annualized at 3.2. I think we're almost on the mark there. Fringe benefits up 15.92, but youth shelter is new. So if you're normalizing in comparison to the prior year, you got to back that out, 13.73. The big drivers are pension costs, employee health pension costs, fringe benefits, offset by higher employee health contributions. The board decided to share the pain with the taxpayers, and you've done this last year and this year to ask the employers to contribute more of their pay towards their health benefit costs. Costs are higher for two reasons: higher wages and higher plan enrollment. Higher plan enrollment means we have less vacancies, but we still have moderately high vacancies,
Right.
where it was extreme when we started to adjust pay. Debt service, we already talked about it, 2.5 million a year on a 35 million bond, up maximum, and over 20 years. Human services, we already talked about the match, 3.7 increase includes 2.5 million for emergency 911 capital and personnel. Berks Heim, we're projecting, we're utilizing a contribution and giving a dividend, if you will, in terms of like a reduction in tax burden to the taxpayers. And I'm finally confident in the Heim budget. For 2 years, we kept thinking we were going to roll this thing up again, and then those staffing ratios hit. And in just a moment, if I can, thank you to the whole board for supporting the effort that Commissioner Rivera led at CCAP to talk about those staffing ratios, which were fine for the day, but they put them by shift, and it just capped what we can do. But we finally got the staffing pattern right, and I feel really good. And they ended up with lower pension costs because their pension calculation is different than the rest of the county, and that enabled us to have a net income. And we feel very confident moving 1.5 million over to reduce the tax burden, and that still leave them a net income of 2.7 million. That'll leave them with unrestricted net assets of 4.4 months, operating float of 21.6 million. That's 132 days. Our budget's going to enable us to end the year at 139 million unassigned.
And we may be the only county nursing home operating in the black.
That is correct.
It's just, I'm so excited with what we've been able to do, what the unions have been able to do in helping us about almost 5 years ago with efforts. Because when I took office, there were between 35 and 40 counties with nursing homes. There are 12 today. And every one that I'm aware of that is sold, we're bleeding red ink, just absolutely unable to keep those afloat. And we've been in the black since before I've been here.
Yeah, I think we got there around, I think we broke even in 2006 or 7.
Okay, and
we were
came in 8.
Right, we were bleeding ink too.
Well, we were projecting.
Before you, like, I'm talking like in 23, we had like a $3.5 million loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, no, 2003.
2003, right.
Yes, yeah.
But in 2009, the move to CHR was a game changer. And we earlier this year signed an extension with CHR. They manage the operation, but they're our employees. It's our facility, and they do amazing work for the most needy people in our community. And so is this the first time that you've been in a position where you've been able to actually put the revenue in as a marked item.
Yes. And that's why I'm highlighting
That's
it.
significant
And
because
that's why I'm
that's
highlighting it in the budget.
that's
And I'm
incredible.
asking that we do this, and I'm finally confident in the result, and what I think the result is that we can achieve. And there's a lot of contributing factors to that increase. We got 7.1, 7.7 on the FFS rate increase.
This is amazing.
About 7.1% on the FFS rate increase. That's the Medicaid bed rate. We got 4.1% increase on the Medicare rate. So there's a lot of contributing factors here, but I feel like this is mildly conservative, not aggressively conservative, but I think it's achievable.
Yep.
And so
Well,
therefore,
kudos to you and your team. You've been very involved in this. Kudos to CHR. Kudos to the management team out there, which are CHR, and our management folks, as well as all of the staff, or COO. I did not know this was coming. I mean, I glanced through this, but this didn't jump out at me. And now that I understand what you're saying, this is very, very significant. And what it means is the long-term future of the Heim is secure.
it still isn't, even despite this.
Absolutely.
That's why I mentioned the
You wouldn't do
unrestricted
this
reserves.
if there was any question.
Yeah, they're going to still be able to carry their operations for 132 days, 4.5 months.
Mhm.
By contrast, our budget,
60 days.
no. With this budget,
Oh.
we end up projecting at the end, with all these things we're doing,
Mhm.
we're projecting at the end of the year of 25 to be an unassigned fund balance that can be used for any governmental purpose of $139 million. I think it's 139.7. That equates to 84 days. Well, when we were looking at this, like if we didn't take care of that deficit, it wasn't going to be 84 days. And probably in 26, we were going to go under 60 days. So we
Mhm.
needed to take care of this problem. But it's still, and our number's strong, right? This is even stronger. So I just think that it's been such an investment. It's time to let the taxpayers share in some of the benefit of that. And then we're maintaining our commitments to economic development. That includes Greater Ready Chamber Alliance, library systems, includes our legal obligation, contractual obligation to Art Reading Public Library of $900,000, park system, SCT BARTA we talked about, RAC, we're still maintaining our sponsor support at 3.25, and they are still going to get $1 million carve out from the Berks County Redevelopment Authority for capital projects. And hopefully by they can use that even to offset if they needed to do a new bond issue, say to improve a facility. This helps them borrow less. That lowers their recurring debt service cost. Connection Works, we talked about this support, inflationary increase to the R3 program. That's not a new program, though. We've been supporting that for several years now. And then Reentry Works we talked about. That's the new piece. But again, we already talked about how much lower that is than what was requested. COCA, we're still maintaining the 1.425 contribution to COCA, and the Redevelopment Authority is still maintaining their 300,000 contribution. And of course, passenger rail we talked about. Gets us to the capital plan. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this other than say that it's 43.1 million. We have 15.9 million that was authorized by the board a year ago. It wasn't done in 24. It's not going to be done in 24. We carried it over. If you want to do a normalized comparison, you back that off and you go, okay, capital plan last year was 25.3 million. And if you take out the carryover, this year would be 27.2. On a comparative basis over a 2-year period, it's 1.9 million higher. One thing I'll point out is the space allocation fit out cost. That's for the South Campus. That's for improvements at the courthouse and the service center as a result of that whole project. We're still maintaining our commitment to ag land easements because that's the will of the board of $1 million a year. And then there's other highlights here. In the interest of time, commissioners, I've listed the departments and some of the major projects. I'm not going to repeat them all, but the taxpayers can read it from here. And also it's very well documented in our written budget message. So every budget comes with risk rewards. We spend a lot of time on the high, but we're budgeting for the whole year, no more build unless unless a CCAP effort led by Commissioner Revere is successful, we can't plan for more than 320 beds unless the medical labor market, available people wanting to do that kind of work, increases, and it hasn't yet. We've stabilized with all the policy decisions we made. We're still profitable, like we said we would be when we talked about increasing the rec care wages. But it depends on the staffing pattern. Do we get more turnover for some reason? I think competitively from a pay perspective, I don't think that if we're losing people, it shouldn't be for that reason. Continued tight labor market. I think everything I've read is the labor market's going to stay low because of the baby boomer retirements. At least, I don't know what you're hearing at NACO, but I think it's like through 2028, I believe, something like that.
Foreseeable future.
Yes.
Tight market.
Yes. And then continuation of the IGT program. That's a state program where they maximize federal Medicaid dollars. And just for your benefit, the net benefit is $13 million. It's about 400,000 higher than it was last year. It's pretty flat. But they made up for it with that Medicaid bed rate increase of 7.1%. Economic impact on the pension asset performance. Look, the pension asset, this is and the value and the contribution we make, it's tied to two things. One is wages and growth in number of employees. So active employees in the plan and growth of wages increases the liability side. And the investment performance on our asset, if it will offset that if it increases, but when it decreases, it makes a bigger delta. Our contributions go up. If the asset performance improves and goes higher than we thought, then it'll shrink it. But it shrinks it over 5 years the way assets gain gets.
So your pension assumption for this budget is $577 million. As of this morning, we're $578 million. Hopefully, it at least stays.
Yes.
I'm hoping by the end of the year, it might go up.
Well, what's interesting is I was going to say on October 18th, it was, I believe it was 582 million.
Yeah, it was over 80.
And so I kind of went, I don't know where before the election, I'm going, I don't know. So, but you know what? I'm not going to leave it at 569 million, which is what we talked about when we were talking about the forecast. I'm going to use 577, and I'm feeling pretty good. We should be able to achieve that. Hopefully we will. Christian, you make the point that thing's been a yo-yo since the middle of August.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think we got as high as like 584 million. Then it dropped and we went below like 568. We're down like 561. Then it came back up. It's been this.
We'll see what it is.
But what the
it
good
will
news
be
is,
whatever it
the
is.
good news is it dropped, but it didn't go lower than 577. That's actually really good. Headcount, we talked about, it affects wages, but it also affects more workers you have, the more potential claims you have for workers' comp. And obviously you have more enrolled employees in your health plan. So you end up with higher healthcare costs. Inflation affects that too, with Medicare, medical inflation, where the average claim cost has been going up. State budget cuts, we're assuming we're going to get exactly what we got July 1 next year with an appropriate inflationary adjustment. We won't know though. And Commissioner Santoni will know this. We won't know till they adopt that budget July 1 next year, but we have to do a budget.
Assuming they adopt it.
Well, assuming
July
they do,
1, right?
and we have to take a guess at it now. And so it's not exactly perfect science, but growth in the jail ADP, we're assuming we got a daily population of 800. New shelter care facility, we already talked about. The key is managing to get those 10 out-of-county placements. And detention, we talked about this 3-county regional facility with significant state capital funding. I'm mentioning it because those two things need to happen. And otherwise, we will have a potential need for more tax revenue if we go forward on our own. And debt guarantees, hopefully the ones we have outstanding, we won't have to step in and take care of. And loans, I'm not aware of any new loans, but if we make loans, that will definitely have a detrimental impact on our interest income because it'll lower the amount of our reserves and cash reserves. So we got to be careful there. New funding for off-budgetary discretion. I think where we're at, I just want to encourage you to keep really challenging requests for new funding because you know and I know they came, they went. There's other ones I didn't talk about, but my experience has been they don't go away. So you're going to have to remain vigilant on that. Part that I know the commissioners like, this is how is the taxpayers' money spent? And if you look at this slide and you look up on the about 11 o'clock part of the pie chart, you got emergency 911. That's 3%. You've got judicial about 10 o'clock on this pie chart. That's 22%. And you have down at about maybe 5 o'clock on this pie chart, you have public safety, 29%. That represents 54% or $140 million of the tax consumption in the 2025 budget. And within public safety, and Commissioner Leinbach touched on this earlier, the jail, and we have to do the jail. The jail cost in this is $57 million. It's almost 3 times larger than the next net cost department in the county. It is a huge cost, but it is a necessary cost for public safety. So
it's necessary, but we want to make sure that it is being utilized by the people that need to be there versus the people that could be doing community service and other options to incarceration. Almost every study shows incarceration does not benefit the individual. Some people who are violent, flight risk, have to be incarcerated. I get that. But I continue to look at this every single time. And public safety and judicial are connected at the hip. That's 51% of the entire budget in that whole criminal justice system. So when we're able to make common sense reform in those areas, it has a direct social benefit, but a direct financial benefit to the bottom line for every taxpayer in Berks County.
I'll add on 2 things. So you, Commissioner Leinbach, to a lesser extent, Commissioner Rivera, but former Commissioner Barnhart, we remember when the jail ADP was 1,300, 1,320. Yes, and it's I budgeted 800. My understanding is it's maybe 750 to 775 somewhere
in there right now.
This tax requirement from the taxpayers would be significantly higher if that jail was sitting at 1,300 inmates. And so that's to your point that by lowering that population and doing the programming we do support, they don't recidivate. That also affects when people don't recidivate. That means there's less people in the criminal justice system. That means there's less
closed there, right?
That's less people in APO, adult probation, less
Yeah.
people in juvenile probation. We've seen the benefit in juvenile probation. Adult probation has said for a number of years they needed more staff. And what we've been able to do because of the programming that really started with former director Bob Williams. I mean,
Right.
He was like a pioneer in the state back when I started on this. But getting kids the treatment they needed instead of putting them into like detention centers, right? Or state institution detention centers. We've been able to move staff systematically out of JPO to APO without having to come and ask for new APO positions and increase the need for more tax revenue. So it all ties together to your point, Commissioner. So that brings us to where we are today. We presented today. We're going to come back on December 19th. We're going to give you an update for any revisions that we make. We're still updating for more current information. We're aware of some changes we need to make, but nothing dramatic, nothing that would require us on December 19th to make those changes available for another 10 days of public inspection. So we will satisfy the statutory requirement of 20-day public inspection and comment between now and December 19th. We're going to post the budget to the county website, which is www.berkspa.gov. At the conclusion of our meeting, our public relations professional, Jonathan Heitzman, is also going to do on the news feed part of our website, going to put a hot link there today to connect to these documents. And we're going to also have it available in our office and at the commissioner office. So with that, commissioners, I want to thank you for your time. I'd be remiss if I don't give a big shout out to my team because I could not have done all this without their tireless efforts. And I really want to commend my deputy, Laura Jones. She did incredible level of effort this year because we took on a new responsibility. And it turned out to be a far bigger challenge that we could have ever anticipated. And still, we got the message done to COO Barnhart the same amount of days before we did last year. Even though when I was sitting here 3 weeks ago, I'm going to Laura, I'm going, one day at a time, but man, I'm getting nervous. I mean, it was a scramble, but it was done thoroughly. We didn't cut corners. We worked a lot of hours, extra hours to do it. And that's our job. But thank you. And thank you. I couldn't have done it without all of your effort.
Thank you very much. Laura, I'm going to ask you, since there's a microphone there, introduce the team behind you, please.
Sure.
And as she introduces you, just stand up. We know some of you, but we like to, yep, and they've got the camera on you as well. So go ahead, Laura.
I'd like to start out the introductions also with saying thank you. We have a fantastic team, and the commitment from everybody to work really hard, make sure those numbers are correct. I mean, that's essential to what we do. I couldn't be more pleased and lucky to work with such an outstanding group of people. So first is Dawn Koch. She's heavily involved in CYS. Next is Kate Rentschler. She's our financial manager and has helped extensively with the message and pulling things together. Very grateful for Kate and her ability to proofread and dig in. Next is Jackie Shippert. She specializes in the capital, which is a moving target constantly. And over our 5-year capital plan, we're at about $100 million worth of capital projects. So it's quite a responsibility. Next is Jen Savage. She specializes in all things Berks, which is a complicated accounting process to oversee. Next is Alex. Alex is new for the CYS team. We're excited to have her in our group. Next is Kevin Rentz. Kevin specializes mostly with general fund departments, and he's also the trainer in our department and assisting other departments with managing our budget software or tasks in the accounting software Oracle. So we're lucky to have Kevin. He's our most tenured senior financial analyst. And last is Yadira Ramos. She's our techie girl. Very, very helpful when it comes to charts and PowerPoint things and reports, and we're very lucky to have you, dear, on our team as well. And also cash flow. Oh boy, that's a beast. Yeah, she does the Access database, which all of us appreciate that more than words could express. and so thank you guys very much for all of this, and thank you for letting our team have a moment.
Thank you very much. We do appreciate the work that you do. Probably to the public, 99% of the time, they're not even aware. This is the one, I don't know that everyone comes to the meeting on the 19th. It's really the month before where we have the whole team. So I thought it's good to recognize each of you for what you do. So thank you very much. Any comments from my colleagues?
Just a few. Again, want to thank Bob and Laura and all the team for the work that you do, making sure that the county stays in the right place when they're talking about the finances. Just a few things to comment is one, various months ago when the budget process started out, Kevin and the COO team did send out an email and spoke with all our department heads, asking them to tighten the belt, let them know that things were tough and that they needed to look anywhere that they could to save money for the county, and many of the departments heads were able to find different places to save money and came through. So thank you to those department heads who did take that deeper look and look for ways to save money for the taxpayers. Also, another thing, and I'll be brief on all of these because I know time is running, but one of the things we also have to consider when we look at the capital projects is there has been no major work done in most of the county properties for, I don't know how many years now. Is it 30 years, Kevin?
The downtown campus, at least 30 years.
So the downtown campus, at least 30 years. The Ag Center, it's been, I don't know how many years. So at some point, it's like your car, you have to say, okay, I need to do some repairs to make sure that it'll go on for longer time. So that's why we're making this investment of money. One, making sure that the buildings have the upgrades that they need, making the space allocation changes as needed to make sure that less wear and tear is put on the buildings here downtown. So that's why it was important to not keep on pushing off these capital projects, but saying, you know what, we have to bite the bullet. We have to get them now to make sure that these buildings will be here in the long run and won't have excessive maintenance and upgrade costs into the future. And the third item I want to briefly touch on as well, which is we've touched on, I know Commissioner Santoni touched on this a few weeks ago, but the county is limited to the ways we generate revenue. It's mostly property taxes. There is some fee for service, but permits, but very little. Most of it is property taxes. When you look at other municipalities and school districts, some of them have multiple sources of income streams, such as property taxes, business privilege taxes, personal taxes, and the list goes on. So the county is limited to mostly property taxes for the revenue that we need to generate to continue to run county government. Thank you.
Any comments, Commissioner Santoni?
Very, very briefly, just to again commend Bob, Laura, and their team and your team for the great work that you do. This is my first go around, so I want to thank you for all the input that you've provided. It's a big budget. We're a big county, and there's a lot happening. We provide lots of services that sometimes people take for granted and don't really know that the county of Berks provides those. So. Nobody likes to vote for a tax increase, but I think it's incumbent upon us as a responsible board to make sure that the services that the people expect are what they get at a decent price, at a good price. And just to follow up on Commissioner Rivera's comment about the property tax, that's what we have to do to provide the services. And we would like to go to the legislature, my former colleagues, and ask for some other ways for funding county services and county services that people expect at the county level. We can do other things. We'll work on that. But I just want to thank you for helping this new commissioner through this process. And the only question, if I'm allowed to ask a question, sure, on maybe a couple questions. Just to talk about the fund balance, Bob. You said that there's some, I don't know if it's requirements, but recommendations through Government Finance Officers Association and others. What could you just expound on that a little bit as to the importance, number one, of it, and maybe why we do it at the level that we do it?
Sure. The GFO, Government Finance Officers Association best practice, states that at a minimum, you should have 2 months of operating expenditure float. In other words, if something happened to your revenue streams and you weren't able to receive any money, you need to have enough reserves that you just don't shut down and no services are provided, right? So they recommend a minimum of 60 days, 2 months. They'll go on to say that if you have a complex organization, a complex budget, complex services, that it would be appropriate to be even higher. And I would submit that we have a very complex service menu of services. I mean, for one, we have healthcare, right? That is so specialized. That's not, to Commissioner Leinbach's point. You know, there was 35 or 40 homes, and now there's 12. It's complex. It's hard to manage and maintain a reasonable tax rate burden in doing so. But the reason you need that, it sounds like a lot of money at $139 million, but we have over a $680 million budget, expenditure budget.
Well, and it's happened before because the public is going to say, okay, that's nice, but how realistic is that? 2014 into 2015, numerous counties across the Commonwealth, because it was a huge budget debacle, if you remember. You weren't here, so we're not holding you responsible. But numerous counties had to write tax anticipation notes to get them from the end of the year till they started to see tax revenue in end of February, beginning of March. We were not one of them. we fared well through that process because of the focus on that. So that's actually an excellent question. And what I hear from people is, okay, yeah, that sounds great. How often does that happen? It happened not that long ago.
Oh, no, it sure did. And not only that, Commissioner, there were governments that actually furloughed people.
Yep.
And they had to cut back on,
That's correct.
on services that were definitely needed in their communities. But the other thing it does for us is it gives us the financial stability that we need to maintain our AAA bond rating. And when we go out and borrow the money, I'll have our financial advisor run what that would have been at AAA and what it would have been at AA1. And you'll be able to see firsthand how it saved the taxpayers money. Final 2 points I'll make is because we've managed a reserve, 3 points. The reserve level we're projecting is definitely lower than what it was 3 years ago, even 4 years ago, even before COVID. It's been decreasing. The question is why? Because we've been using the reserves to fund capital.
Mm-hmm.
If we didn't have that reserve level, our debt footprint would be significantly higher.
Correct.
I mean, we're talking a minimum of $18 million a year we've been spending out of general fund on capital. And every one of those would have been a bond issue, or a combination of a few would have been a bond issue. Our debt would be significantly higher, and the tax burden would be higher. The other point is we're also using, you know how we're taking some of the Heim performance now because we've invested in it. We put a lot of effort into it. We're going to benefit the taxpayers. That reserve level generates interest income.
Mm-hmm.
That's $8 million in this budget. Can you imagine if we only had like 10%? If we're down 10% of the governmental funds, 60 million. We're cutting that a little more than half. We're sitting here saying we need to raise tax rate for like $4.5 billion. So the taxpayers are getting the benefit of that as well, because the only thing that you guys talked about, and you're right, we only control the tax rate. And we want to encourage with Imagine Berks, the growth in that. But sometimes the economy comes back and bites us. And I think that's what happened in 24. Recently. But those things are coming together for the benefit of the taxpayer. We're not using that to go out and just willy-nilly go fund more net new programs. So I hope that answers your question.
I appreciate that. And my last comment is I think it's important for people to know is the transparency that we all have with our budget. It's out there for people to look at. We're not hiding anything. And I think that's really important to get that message out to the people that we represent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Will of the board, with the balance of the agenda?
I'll make a motion to accept the agenda as presented due to our time constraints.
I'll second the motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is carried. We'll move to reports of our treasurer and controller. We'll start with Mitch Darcourt, our county treasurer.
Thank you, Commissioner Barnhart. Today we have an opening balance.
I'm not Commissioner Barnhart.
Commissioner Linebaugh. Everyone looks the
You
same.
look alike, so it's
It's the hair. It's the hair.
Thank you, Commissioner Linebaugh. Today we have an opening balance of $218,312,934.46. We have a balance to clear of $6,152,641.11, leaving us with a balance of $212,160,293.35. That is all, Commissioner Linebaugh.
Thank you very much. I forgot to highlight the minutes. So are there any additions or corrections for the November 14th meeting minutes? Hearing none, the minutes will stand approved as presented. I do not believe that our county controller is on. I do not see him. So I am going to give the controller's report. Just give me 1 second. Total accounts payable, $12,947,591.85. There is an employee payroll to clear, $5,363,546.45, leaving a total cash disbursements of $18,311,138.30. With that, comments from our Chief Operations Officer.
Thank you, Commissioner Linebaugh and everyone here. And I just want to point out that I see this team of professionals day in and day out, morning, noon, night, weekends, and holidays. We're either here together or we're communicating on emails together. They're a phenomenal team. I
We're
think
celebrating Christmas together
basically, yes.
and holidays.
Yes. They work holidays. So similar to our elections department.
Sure.
They're just phenomenal folks. Should be darn proud of the work ethic they have under Bob and Laura. My important notice today is on the agenda today was approved an amendment to the burn ban, the countywide burn ban, which really in short order allows the local jurisdictions burn bans to have more authority than the county. So originally the county burn ban kind of overrode or superseded the local, but
that wasn't our intent.
No, it wasn't our intent. That's why there's a second revision to the original burn ban. We need to modify this as we go to give those municipalities that have more strict controls. We found out recently through our Director of Emergency Services, there were some people who were bending the rules with respect to agricultural related businesses. We're trying to shore that up and allow these municipalities to do their job to enforce this.
Yeah, and then jump in, use common sense. We had an ag entity taking down trees and burning an enormous pile of brush and wood, and the fire chief was livid, and because our ban excluded agriculture, this individual said they were able to do that and they weren't subject to the township's burn ban, which would not have allowed that type of burning. So again, common sense, that's what we need to focus on.
So don't get riled up through the precipitation we had last night through Friday. It's not going to make a dent in the average rainfall or to help us get away from a drought condition. Recognizing that here's some information from Keith Mayer from the Reading Eagle. National Weather Service in Mount Holly reported that the average rainfall from August 12th to November 9th was the smallest precipitation total for any 90-day period in a 155-year Berks precipitation database, eclipsing a 90-day period from 1886. Keep this in mind. Don't assume that this rain is going to wash away or eliminate a burn ban or any sort of drought conditions. We're still asking for 10 to 15% reduction in water usage, and October was the driest month on record for an October, recorded back in 1924. We're in serious times here. Point taken, common sense, use your head. You can certainly hold off on burning, open burning until we're out of this, but we don't see anything in sight. So the burn ban is still in effect. We are in daily discussions regarding whether we're going to extend it beyond its termination in the end of November. That's certainly something at our discretion, working with the district forester and our director of emergency services. So we'll report on a weekly basis on an update on any burn ban lifting or continued restrictions. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's all I have. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I missed this last week too. The VA ribbon cutting ceremony is tomorrow at 11:30, and it's being moved indoors because of inclement weather. So we haven't had to say that in a while.
That's true.
Thank you.
I think all three of us will be there.
I'll be there.
Yep. Looking forward to it. Normally we would come to commissioners' public comments. If my colleagues are okay, we want to conclude here. Comments regarding Thanksgiving, I think, would be appropriate, but we literally have an interview in 11 minutes that we're kind of obligated to.
Yep. And just one thing I want to remind everyone, certification for the general election will be tomorrow at 8 a.m. We're still not sure if it will be for all races or for all, excluding the McCormick and Casey.
And that'll be right
race.
here.
That will be 8 a.m. here
And
tomorrow
virtually.
morning, and will be available.
The link's already up?
As well.
Good.
Yep. So that I will keep it at that. Also, just want to thank Sheriff Weekneck. He ends his service as sheriff on December the 1st to start as the State House Representative for District 5. So I want to thank him for his many years of service. to Berks County and the Sheriff's Department and wish him best in his new role as state representative. And I want to wish everyone a happy and safe Thanksgiving.
I'll do the same. I want to thank, I've only been here for a year, so I only have had a chance to work with Eric for a year, but I want to thank him for his service to the county, the many years, and he's on his way to Harrisburg. I'm sure he'll enjoy it. I did, and I'm sure he'll have a nice career as long as he wants to be there. And I also want to wish everybody a safe and healthy Thanksgiving, safe travels if you're traveling, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Santoni and Commissioner Rivera. We also approved Mandy Miller will become the acting sheriff on December the 2nd as a result of Eric's, I don't know if it's a move up or not. We'll see. I know he's excited about it, but he'll find out.
Ask him the end of next year.
Yeah, ask him the end of next year, or maybe even several months into the budget battle that I anticipate. But I do wish everyone a blessed Thanksgiving. It's time of the year I encourage people to just sit back and start thinking about the things you're thankful for. A lot of times you do it initially and you're stuck at 5, but then keep thinking, and all of a sudden there's 10, then there's 20. We're blessed, especially in this country. Not everybody has it easy, I get that, but when you look at what other countries are going through, it's pretty incredible to live in the land of the free and the home of the brave. So blessed Thanksgiving. With that, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Meeting is adjourned.